Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Cade Monsell, and for this episode, we are going to be doing our first group discussion, and our topic for the day is going to be how to make great sequels. And for this discussion, I have three guests with us here today. I am once again joined by two returning guests, Felicity and Hunter, and one brand new guest, our friend Cassidy. So first up, Felicity, Hunter, welcome back.
Thank you for having
Yay.
us. Happy to be back.
Of course. And Cassidy, welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Super pumped to be here.
Absolutely. So, how to make good sequels. When it comes to sequels, what are some of your favorite sequels of all time? Like, what are the ones that come to mind when you think of great sequels?
Just because we were talking about it before we hopped on here, I do enjoy New Moon from the Twilight series, but my favorite sequel is probably I mean it's like I don't know, what do you call it? It's a trilogy, but it counts. Obviously, I'm talking about the sequel, Before Sunset. I love the Before Sunrise trilogy. It's like one of my favorite movies. And I would say that's one of my favorites. And then I don't know, The Hunger Games was really good. I feel like I haven't seen a lot of the classics, so I can't speak on them a lot, but I know that we're gonna probably touch on some of those, so I'm excited to hear about them. I'll pass it on to Hunter.
Yeah, I would say classic is like Star Wars, but for more of like guilty pleasure like Twilight and The Hunger Games, I would say those. I'm gonna go with Harry Potter just because I wasn't a big Harry Potter fan. I tried to read the book in third grade, way too big for me at that age. And so high school, I watched it all in one day, and I was like, this is incredible. I understand why people wait years to watch the next movie, like the next sequel, because it's just like the characters building throughout is like incredible. So Harry Potter, and then yeah, guilty pleasures probably Twilight as well. Sorry to add on to the to
I
the
have I have two more to add to the guilt, or I have one to add to the guilty pleasure, Mamma Mia.
Hmm.
And one other regular good sequel is Glass Onion, the Knives Out series. I really like both of those films.
Yeah, absolutely. Glass Onion was really great. And I think that one thing that's important when you make a sequel, one key to making a good sequel, at least, I think it's important to have something new. I think that's something that sequels generally need. Sequels, I think, should give audiences something new while also trying to stay true to what made the original one special, like the heart of what it made special. And I know that it's not necessarily easy, but I think it's still worth trying and it's a good risk to take for making a good sequel. I don't know if you guys agree.
I feel like something that really comes to my mind when you said that was like the Spider-Man series. And I'm just thinking about like that last Spider-Man movie where they incorporated like all three of the Spider-Mans, like Tom Holland and Tobey Maguire and Andrew. And I don't know, that just like immediately came to my brain when you were talking about like bringing it, like serves justice to like the old Spider-Mans and like the people that played Spider-Man before, and then also like incorporating all of them and then also giving like a new twist to it. Um, I don't know. I feel like fans for that were like so excited. Kind of like a silly, very silly one, but like when I think of Shrek, I think of like when they added Puss in Boots, it was like this whole new ego they added to the whole character because Shrek was all of a sudden like, oh, who's this guy coming in, like being all hot? And then they had like this whole battle where they had to like resolve their own issues. And in the end, they end up becoming like best friends and we love it. Like they're a trio now and it's great. So I think when it comes to adding another element, a character is very important because it can totally pivot the entire story and the relationships with everything. Even though it's like Shrek, it's like a cartoon, it's still like I remember it.
Yeah, I remember Shrek 2 as well. Actually, I think that aside from the first movie, I think that movie, along with the new Puss in Boots film, was probably the best one in the franchise. I think Shrek 2 is actually a very kind of an underrated sequel. I don't think it gets talked about enough, actually.
Yeah, I totally agree. It was like massive compared to the first one because it was like in a whole different realm of what they had created from like these swamp characters, very like
environmentally realistic, and now we're in this like fairy world and we don't know what's going on, and Shrek is confused and everyone is confused. I think it's like a big turning point for that series.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people say that Shrek 2 is they like it better than the first film, which is interesting. But I haven't seen the second one in a long time, but everybody says it's their favorite, so I need to rewatch it soon.
The music is so good.
In any Shrek film, I mean, the first one, I mean, it has all the bops. I would say also like something to counter, I guess the like does it need something like totally different to be a good sequel? Like the Scream franchise is pretty much just based on the same sort of, you know, formula, but there's always just like new characters or sort of a new atmosphere, but you know, it's always there are a lot of the same people in it throughout the whole series. So somehow that always works and every Scream movie is like pretty successful. So, and I feel like you would think that I think they just put out like the fifth or sixth. You would think that that would be the end, but it feels like it's just a new wave of like Scream, like it's gonna go on forever, like Nightmare on Elm Street or like you know the Jason and you know all of that stuff. Like I think it's on its way of being like the next generation of like horror genre film that like is gonna supersede like many decades. So it's pretty interesting with like just the same like storyline, really, you know, every film.
Well, and actually, just to add on to that with Scream 2, I actually did a review for that movie on my channel not too long ago. And one of the things I brought up with my friend Andrew was that, yeah, it's story-wise, it is kind of the same, but it's a totally different environment. You know, instead of taking place in their hometown of Woodsboro, it's at college where they're all currently at. And I think that it was a nice touch because it was a great way to show, you know, they have to deal with a pretty similar situation, but it's in an environment that they don't fully recognized. So I think that was a good challenge for them in that way.
I agree because sometimes like I'll watch a show or like a series of films that you know follow people in high school and then like it usually ends when they graduate and I'm like oh I just want to see like how like what happens when they're you know off in a different environment like college. I kind of relate it to like my hopes and dreams of there had one time been like a High School Musical 4 where they were in college. I still yearn for that, but it'll never happen. So I'm like at least like I guess I get the horror genre version, but like no musical, which sucks.
Yeah, and I think that another thing that's important when it comes to sequels, and this is just an important thing in movies in general, would have to be the stories that they're telling. Stories are always an important part of filmmaking and storytelling in general. And I think that when it comes to sequels, stories should usually have, you know, sequels should really tell different narratives because I think that sequels tend to repeat the same formula that the first movie had a lot. I won't name any, but I think it's kind of made the sequels more underwhelming and predictable. And I think that, you know, for you guys as audiences, does it bother you when sequels sort of repeat the same storyline as the first one, or do you still think it's kind of nice to see as long as it's done in a different way?
That's a good question. I haven't really like put too much thought into it just because I kind of enjoy when they pick up on the same storyline just because my brain needs like a refresher on like what happened, to where their environment is, what the characters have just been through. But I think if it drags on for too long from like what we had just seen, then I think it's kind of have an issue with its storyline. But in general, I think if it picks up where it like kind of left off, I think that's enjoyable from my end.
I feel sometimes that there are certain films. I would say the Fantastic Beasts series did not need to be three movies. I enjoyed them and I would still watch them over and over again because I just love Harry Potter. But when I watched like the second one, I was like, nothing really happened here. Like it kind of furthered the plot along, and like, yeah, sure, there were some things that happened that were like, oh my goodness, but I felt like we didn't really have any. Like the first one had an ending where you were like, what's gonna happen? Second one, it was like, this is a stepping stone. Third one was like, okay, here's the end, but like it wasn't that great. I mean, I still liked it though. It like got me back into Harry Potter once I had seen it all. But I would classify that one as something that like, the sequel definitely wasn't anything special, but it was still good enough to keep me entertained to like watch the third one, because I feel like the only way that sort of sequel works is if you have a dedicated fan base to it. There's not a lot out there that isn't based off a book that can hold people to see a second sequel, like where it's just a continuing storyline and there's no real like change, in the second one. Like it's just kind of following. I feel like it has to be based off a book, and people just have to like want to get to the end of it. That's like the only way I really could see that. Because then I'd be talking about TV shows, and that's just like a whole different story. But yeah.
I agree with both of you guys. I agree, Cass, that like I think it's good to like keep it give us like a little refresher or something like that, and then make it different. Like I like the old and the new mixing. And Felicity, when you were talking about that, I like always say it, but like some things just need to die. Like some things you just have to kill. And it like reminds me of like the Fast and the Furious series. Like, why are there so many like, I don't know, it just really frustrates me when like sequels have a really good thing going, and then like, the studios just know that they can milk it for the money, and then they like just keep making more, and it's like, oh my god, you could have ended on like a really great fucking note, and now we're just milking it, and the series is like not good anymore because it just it just this isn't like a movie, but it just reminds me of like Riverdale, where it's like, what is going on? Like literally what is happening?
Like in Lost, when they had like random creatures coming about in the middle of the show, and it was like we needed to end it. Like,
Yeah, and it just ruins the story. It's like the substance of the story is just like gone now, because we're just trying to like, it's not about the story anymore. It's about like the money we can make off of this, and it's just like really frustrating.
the
So
actors are like not the same. It's
yeah.
what's going on? I don't feel the same about this.
Mhm.
Yeah, I totally agree
Yeah.
with you.
And that's exactly what happened with Twilight. Once you got to like the third, fourth movie, Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson hated working on it at that point, and
Yeah.
and nobody wanted to do it. When you put something out for like so long, it just like it's interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's how it
Feel like,
works.
yeah. Yeah. Anyways.
Well, I do think, well, that's kind of what I wanted to bring up. So I think, so some of the best sequels that I enjoy are the ones that told standalone stories, because I think that sequels, if they rely so heavily on the first movie, then it doesn't feel like they could really exist as just an experience. Like imagine watching Spider-Man No Way Home and not watching any of the other Spider-Man movies before it. I mean, that
Mhm.
would feel pretty unnatural for a viewer to watch, thinking, okay, so why is this character important? Why is he important? Why is she important? And everything like that. But I think one example of a great standalone sequel, and this is a movie that is kind of mixed with the audience, but one sequel that I can think of that told a standalone was Tim Burton's Batman Returns back in 1992. That was the one with Michael Keaton as Batman and Danny DeVito as Penguin and Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman. And I think what's great about that movie, why it works so well as a sequel, is that it tells a standalone story. It has references to what happened in the first movie, but at the same time, it doesn't rely on it too much. It just tells its own self-contained narrative. And I think that that was a nice touch for the movie to exist as a sequel and as a standalone.
I agree, because I feel like that film is iconic. I think it stands out ahead of the original, and the aesthetics of it are just so alluring. Like I was having this conversation with one of my coworkers actually recently about that film, and because he was around when it came out originally, and just like he's like, I saw the original and then I saw this one and it was just so captivating. Like it was it just is a different vibe than you would think it would be. And just like adding Michelle Pfeiffer into the mix, being Catwoman, like, and just Danny DeVito's great always. So it's just a good looking film, and it just has like a good story in it. And like you said, it just like changes, like the vibe sort of. So I definitely think it's a good pick like that you brought up.
When you were talking about like the standalone films and like in Spider-Man where it's like if you hadn't seen the ones before it, like you might not get the references to like, you know, what was going on in this. And then it just made me think of like the whole Marvel universe as a whole. And like I don't know if it would be considered like a sequel, like the whole Marvel universe, but I feel like I can't even watch a Marvel movie anymore because there's so much like that they bring back, and then like you have to have watched like all of them, I feel like, to like understand some of the references or like to understand what's going on. So yeah, when you were saying that, it just reminded me of like Marvel and that like there's just so many of them, like I don't even know what's happening anymore. And you know, you have to watch the ones previously to get it. So
I personally don't have too much of an opinion on that, but I would definitely watch it and then reflect on it based off of your conversations here and think about it a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, and I think back to what Hunter was saying about the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Imagine this. Back in 2019, when Avengers Endgame came out, so many people were hyped for it, and it did really well, and rightfully so. It was a pretty great movie. But here's the thing, though. It was sort of the conclusion of that whole 10-year saga that the MCU was at the time. But imagine watching that movie and not watching any of the MCU movies before it.
me me literally going to see it. I was confused.
Yeah, I feel like because of that, because it's such a big celebration and reflection of that franchise, I think a lot of the payoffs don't really hit as hard as it would if you had seen them before, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
But aside from that, aside from standalone sequels, when you have direct sequels, I think that what's nice about them is I think direct sequels can still work because if it's still a continuation of the same story. I think, like, look at the Lord of the Rings movies. The second one, The Two Towers, is a continuation of the first one, The Fellowship of the Ring, and it's still a great movie. All three of those movies are fantastic. But I think that when you have direct sequels to that, it's sort of one of those things where, okay, well, so this is a continuation of the first movie, but does that mean that it's going to continue on into another movie, like a third movie in a trilogy, if that makes any sense? So sometimes when you have direct sequels that leave the door open for more, there are times where I think they don't really have much of a resolution or a payoff because it leaves the door open for a continuation. And sometimes that might hurt the story because it could feel like the story is not very complete in that way. So do you think direct sequels are still good in that way, or do you prefer standalones more?
Like I said, I think that it depends on what the like basis is, because like I said earlier, Fantastic Beasts, the second film, I was like, this is ending on a note where you don't really know what the solution is, and now you're going to wait for the third one, and people are just going to see the third one because it's Harry Potter like universe. I don't have a other one in my head at the moment as an example, but I mean, that's like my negative opinion on it. But then like there's probably some other ones that I can't think of right now that do work, as an open-ended one. But hopefully they're not based off a book series because I feel like we're only gonna, or like a universe like a Marvel or DC, anything like that. So I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, nothing comes like straight to my head for this. And yeah, I feel like I gotta think about it more because it's hard because so many sequels are like so like different, and then it just depends on like the sequel and like what you're doing with it. I gotta think a little bit more about this one.
Yeah, I agree. I think with what you were saying with the story, it kind of does leave you hanging and it kind of trails the story instead of making it a complete wraparound circle and making it into a concise, feature. But yeah, I would say the same. I have to do a little bit of thinking on this one. But I don't know. Recently, every time I see a series on Netflix that's recently coming out, I just don't want to watch it because it doesn't have the same feeling as a feature in like a movie theater or where you're physically going and it feels like you're having an experience. Like I feel like they kind of just throw series on Netflix now just for obviously the money and like entertainment factor, but I just feel like it doesn't hold the same story as a lot of other films used to.
Yeah, I would say like maybe an example that's not like a book series would be like horror film series, because the way they end is usually like, oh, you think you've killed the person. Oh no, they're still around, and then they're gonna keep coming back and back and back and back. Or they're like not a human being and they are a like sort of ghostly, you know, metaphysical presence that can keep coming back and back. So I feel like in some ways that works if it's a good series or a good villain. But there are some that it's like you really don't need the 20th you know, whatever, Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, whoever else.
Well, and to add on to that, when we were just talking about horror, one that really comes to mind is the Halloween franchise. And I look back at the recent ones that we had, the 28 film, and also Halloween Kills from 2021 and Halloween Ends. There was that whole trilogy that was sort of the direct continuation of the original from 1978. And I did enjoy the first one a lot. And the second and third one, I kind of do have mixed feelings about. One of the main reasons is because the second one, that Halloween Kills, and this kind of relates to what we were just talking about. The thing about it is that the story itself, it's really more about killing time instead of focusing on important things. You know, that's really what setting up the third movie is. It's basically setting up the big conclusion. So again, it's more like a time killer. And I think that's kind of how I felt about the second Fantastic Beasts movie, which relates to what you were saying, Felicity, which I did enjoy all the Fantastic Beasts movies. But again, I think that the second one, it felt more like they were just stalling what was inevitably going to happen, all the big picture of everything in that way.
Thank you for agreeing. Because that's how I feel. I do like it. I of course love it, but yeah, it's just like a stepping stone. And then you have to wait like 3 years for the next one. It's like maybe just do it all at once, or make it a series, like a like a TV series. There are so many things that I think people just should have made TV series instead of like a sequel or a trilogy. I mean, in this day and age, like might as well. Like I heard somebody say that about Oppenheimer the other day. They were like, I wish they had just done a TV series instead of a 3-something hour movie, They should have, because they could have done more. They could have put more into it, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't seen it yet, so I can't say. And obviously it's not a sequel, it's just a really long movie.
Yeah, it is, but I did still think it was a great movie overall. But aside from, the stories that the sequels tell, another important thing that I think, and we talked about this a little while ago, is when it brings in new characters. If sequels include new characters, I think, sequels, they can keep the same characters, but from the original. But I think adding at least one or two or more new characters, I think that that's a good way to introduce and create new dynamic that wasn't present in the original or any of the previous ones. And actually, I actually wanted to talk with Cassidy about that, because you mentioned how Puss in Boots was brought in Shrek 2. And I think that that was a good example of bringing in a new character who brought, I think, new life to the franchise in that way.
Very much so. My dad literally has like a Puss in Boots like sculpture still like in his kitchen. So it did something. I think it added an element of more adventure, because he's like this like French cat who brings like a French talking cat and like literal leather boots into a film. Like, I don't know. I honestly like don't know who came up with that, but like it was a great idea and it worked really well. So I think it's all about seeing what people are going to be entertained by, seeing like what we're going to like, not necessarily like fall in love with, but like what is going to appeal to us. So I think they were like reaching for the adults because it was like a very mature per se character. And I think the adults would find that funny. So not only were like, are the kids going to laugh at this like leaping and hopping cat flying on trees and Shrek's like getting pissed at him, but I think the adults are also going to enjoy that relationship as well. So I think it's about bringing in like every age factor and every just every kind of audience you can pull with adding another character.
Yeah, of course. And actually, I wanted to add on to what Hunter was saying a lot too long ago about the Fast and Furious franchise. So, Hunter, I can understand your frustrations with that franchise, but one thing that I have noticed looking back at those movies is that the sequels did introduce very entertaining characters that we followed throughout the franchise. One that comes to mind was Tyrese Gibson's character, Roman Pierce, from the second movie. He's remained a very constant presence in that franchise. And I think that if there's one thing in terms of characters good that came out of that franchise, it was definitely his character, because he did bring a lot of life to that franchise.
Yeah. I feel like, and again, maybe I'm just a hater because I have not seen all of them, but I think that when you're making these like big franchises, you're catering like, for Twilight and Harry Potter, like you do have these niche groups of people that are like really invested in the series, but like for the most part, you are catering to like a mass audience, and it's Hollywood, a lot of people are going to be seeing this or whatever. So for me, it just feels like, I don't know. For me, I would maybe watch a few of the Fast and the Furious movies, but like I'm not a diehard fan and I'm not going to see like all 10 or whatever. And so I think I'm more so just talking to like about the general public and like audiences as a whole, and not like niche. You know what I mean? You know what I'm trying to say?
No, I understand.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
makes
yeah.
sense. But what about you, Felicity? Are there any sequels that introduced fan favorite characters for you?
Um, I would, I don't know. I feel like you can think of movies that have heroes and villains in them, not necessarily just in general like Marvel or anything, just like any sort of series that like introduces a new villain. I feel like that always is a good route, and usually pulled, it's pulled off every time. Like if you think of like the Joker or something in the Dark Knight, and then like the Spider-Man movie is like they'll bring in a new villain, stuff like that. I think those are good examples. Or bringing in new people for like the crew that you have in the original film, like the Scream movies, you're getting, new cast like each time because people are dying in the previous ones. Or like the Hunger Games, you're getting new people because they're dying in the other one. Uh so it's just I think those are good ways. Or like Scooby-Doo, like the real Scooby-Doo films, like with the real life people. The first one, like we get a few extra cast to
Scrappy.
spice, yeah, to spice it up, because like it's been a cartoon for so long, like we followed them. So if you're going to make a movie, in general, like that first one's got to be good, and you have to add extra people to it. And then once they did the second one, it was like we're going to throw like all these new villains at you, and we're also going to throw some extra side characters, but there also has to be, because we got to question who the villain is the whole time. So yeah, I would think those are some good ones. Or the new like Hercule Poirot like series that they've been doing. When they did like the Murder on the Orient Express, the Death on the Nile, and then the third one's coming out soon. And it's supposed to be like this haunted ghost one, and you follow this one person who is a detective, and you may know some of his friends and see them in all the films, but you get like 10 or so new people each film that you have to learn, and it's in a new environment. So yeah, I think that there are some like new people that are introduced, and some last and some don't, but I think it's important to introduce those people later on, because if they do stick around, then it's nice. And you get people who, like Hunter was saying, like I think Hunter was saying, at least new people to like hold on to a different niche of people that it appeals to. So
I think that another good example of a sequel that introduced good new characters would have to be Glass Onion, like we were talking about earlier, because I think, obviously it seems like Daniel Craig's character Benoit Blanc was the only character that returned from the first movie, Knives Out, and I kind of was glad that that happened, because again, it's a totally different mystery, so it makes sense that it's just its own cast of characters played by Catherine Hahn, Kate Hudson, Dave Bautista, Ed Norton, who all did really great jobs. And I think what was nice is that all the characters in Glass Onion felt so different from the cast of characters that we got in the first movie, Knives Out, and it created an entirely new dynamic, which was nice to see.
I've seen the second one. Is it the Knives Out one?
Yes.
I think I want to add on to that, only because I think universally when we see someone that we know in a film, we're more attuned to watching it, even if like it's not as good per se. If we know the actor and we like the actor, we're like, oh, I'm gonna watch this, or I'm more likely to watch this because I'm a fan of their work. If that doesn't work, then I think the second case sometimes I see is like the effects of like an action movie or a horror movie are usually like amped up on the second one just to draw people in a little bit more, like hopes of like having something to like save. So when Felicity was talking about the Scooby-Doo one, I remember like the second one having, they're like on the island, I believe, and the effects are like insane compared to the first one. And I was like, what happened? Like, why is everything so unrealistic? It's like, I was just a big jump, I remember, but I was very entertained by all the effects. So that's why like I watched it, even though it felt very different from the first one.
I understand. But another thing, aside from bringing in new characters, I think another essential thing when it comes to sequels and like making good ones, and this relates back to what I was saying about having to do something new. Something that's also nice is when you give the characters, especially returning characters, is when you give them different challenges than they had in the first movie. And I think different challenges are a great way to develop them further as characters, which is always nice. And yeah, I just think characters should be challenged in ways that they were not challenged in the first movie. Again, I'm not saying that that's easy to do at all, but I think it's still worth trying. But it's a good idea to give characters new arcs that add on to their progression, especially if it was started in the original. And again, to help them develop. And what do you think are some challenges, like good examples of that, that are done for characters in movies and sequels in a way?
The Twilight franchise. Every film, like each as it like progresses in the story. I know it's based off a book, but I would say how each film like is higher stakes than the last, and I think that's how you have to do it. You can't like have the first film be like the big thing, and then the second one's like lackluster, and you're like, that's not something that you should be like really worried about. Like the conflict isn't that severe. And I would say like the first one being like that lone vampire James, like who was after Bella. And then in the second one, I think it was Victoria. No, who was it? Victoria, I think. Okay, perfect. And then the third one's like the Volturi, and then again it's the Volturi, but it's like all of them, and it's a big like show off, and it's the end, like it's the last, and that's how it also works is when there's an end point. Like, yeah, sure, it can build and build and build, but it's like this is climax, 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 but this is like the actual like end of the whole series, sort of thing. Like that's when it's done. But I would say like if you build it up each time to a higher degree, that's how something like that can work.
I agree. Like you can't have like a moment of being like, oh, like where are we in this? Like you always have to be like on edge throughout. Like it's always just the climb. And if you're ever like just like sitting in an area, I feel like that's where you lose people.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that way about the Hunger Games. I love the Hunger Games. But,
All right, guys, I think that's where we're going to end part 1 of our discussion. Feel free to go check out part 2 on the channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you there. Thanks. Bye.